Starting us off for number 10 is Dr. Albert K. Bender. Albert was a famous researcher who actually founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, which I didn't even know was real. You may not have heard of it because he abruptly shut it down after being visited by the Men in Black. By 1955, he was this close to releasing a paper proving the US government had covered up proof of UFOs. He was about to publish his paper in the Space Review, but alas, that was just never gonna happen. One night when Albert was in bed, he suddenly felt a nauseating, dizzy spell. All of a sudden, he started seeing multiple dark shapes appear in his room, and he legit thought it was just because he was about to pass out, but he was wrong. The shapes slowly took form and materialized into men in black suits and hats. He couldn't see their faces, but the only thing he could see were their eyes, and they were glowing. The men could somehow speak to Bender's mind directly without actually saying anything. They forced him to destroy all his findings and stop his research altogether. As soon as this encounter took place, Bender was scarred for life. He shut down the bureau straight away. His other work was almost unreadable, and he lived with perpetual anxiety and fear of the men for the rest of his life. He'd get continuous phone calls with no one on the other end, and he actually just ended up dying in 2002. Coming in at number 9 is Dan Aykroyd. Now, if you're unaware, Dan Aykroyd is a Canadian actor, musician, filmmaker, and much more. He was actually an original member of the Not Ready for Prime Time players on SNL back in the day. And I feel like it's a crime, but I actually have never heard of this man. Sorry. Either way, Dan came forward one day about how he was taping a show about the paranormal and the extraterrestrial. After his announcement, he stepped outside to take a phone call from Britney Spears, who asked him to be on SNL Live with her. While they were talking, Dan noticed a black Ford parked across from him on the street. A tall, pale man in a black suit stepped out of the vehicle and stared him down. It was like, you know, when you're at a club and a guy sees you and he's like looking up and down like he just found his prey. That's exactly what it was. Dan was like, what a creep, and turned around for a second, but when he looked back 2 seconds later, the car and man had disappeared. As soon as he walked back into the building, he was told his show was cancelled and to stop filming it there and then. Now, he knows exactly what he saw that day, and he's still adamant the Men in Black are the reason his show got cancelled. Dude, it's fine. Your show got cancelled, you're still on SNL Live with Britney Spears. I think you made it up. I think you can make do. At number 8, we have the library. Peter Roycevich, a professor of folklore, was sitting in the library reading a book on UFOs recommended by one of his colleagues. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a shoe and a leg, and then boom, a man in a black suit was just sitting right in front of him. How did he get there? Where did he go? Cotton Eye Joe. He immediately started asking Peter if he was interested in the book or had he even seen a UFO before, and Peter told him he wasn't interested and was just reading it as a recommendation, to which the guy got angry and shouted at him asking how he could not be interested in the most important facts of the century. But that seemed to be a fake cover-up, since he seemed quite content that Peter wasn't interested in the subject, and then he just left. After the encounter, the professor was a bit shook up, so he got up to walk around the library, but strangely enough, no one was there. No students, no guards, not even the librarians. It was deserted. Slightly scared, he went back to his seat and walked around again an hour later to find people back in their places. Imagine just sitting in a library, being a tenured professor, someone comes at you, shouts at you for not liking UFOs, and then leaves. I'd be like, I'm failing you for that. You're not even in my class and I'm failing you. Filling at number 7 slot is The Sighting. Paul Miller worked in the American Air Force, and one day while coming home from a hunting trip, he saw what looked like a gigantic luminous disc in the sky. He followed the disc and saw it land in an empty field, and out of it came 2 humanoid looking figures. Army man Miller didn't even hesitate before pulling out his gun and shooting one of the figures, and as you can imagine, his aim was quite impeccable, so he was 100% sure he had hit one. He ran towards his car but realized he had suddenly just lost a lot of time. What should have been a 30-second encounter had been 3 hours long. Trying not to overthink it, he went back to work the next day and encountered 3 men in black. They told him that they had his file and they knew everything that had happened, even though he hadn't told a soul. They gently threatened him, because I didn't even know you could gently threaten someone, saying it'd be best if he forgot the whole thing, and Paul was obviously terrified. They knew his address, his name, his parents' names and addresses, everything. So not wanting to take any chances, he said nothing. He actually sent me this whole story in a DM on Twitter. No, I'm kidding. Now at number 6 are the Men in Grey. I don't know, maybe they just got tired of all black all the time. I don't know. Sometimes I get tired of wearing black. Okay? But them were great. Either way, this story comes from William Shearer, who lived in Essex, England at the time. He said he had once witnessed a UFO in the sky, and a few days later, two men in grey suits who he'd never met before just randomly showed up at his house. One stayed in the car whilst the other sat grilling William about what he had seen. But he didn't seem to care about what he said, he seemed more concerned about gaining permission to enter his house somehow. I actually hate that. You know when you're talking to someone and you know they don't give a shit about what you're saying, and I'm just like, why am I still talking? And then you have to somehow just let the conversation end. Either way, what's weird was his voice was super odd. It was expressionless, flat, and his skin was extremely pale. Obviously, William did not let them into his house, but he would not get off that easy. The men told him they'd be back, and soon after they visited him at work. They told him they just wanted to talk to him about the UFO and asked to come in again, and again William refused, after which they both just disappeared into thin air. He never encountered them again, but he low-key thinks they tapped his phone, and William, they probably did. Coming in at number 5 is Larry. So this one was shared by a man named Larry, and yes, that's actually literally all I know about him, that his name's Larry. Either way, Larry was working the night shift at his job when he started falling asleep. As soon as he was drifting, he was contacted telepathically by some presence or entity. The entity communicated that it wasn't from Earth, but gave him no other information. Being a skeptic, Larry was like, nah, and asked for some sort of proof of his existence, and the entity agreed that it would show up when Larry was chilling with his best friend. Months went by, but he couldn't stop thinking about the interaction. Eventually, he caught up with his best friend at an Independence Day celebration, and while they were eating, a black van pulled up. You already know shit's going down if a black van pulls up. Two men in black suits came out, followed by two more, but the bizarre thing was that they weren't shaped like humans. They all sat near Larry's table, stared at Larry for a few minutes, and then just got up and left. That was it. The entity was probably like, I told you I was real. I am real. Peace. Deuces. Larry's like, what was that? Months of not being able to sleep for that. Either way, at number 4 is Frederick Holiday. Growing up, I think we all thought there was some sort of massive snake-like monster in Loch Ness, an ancient dinosaur, a mythical creature that was actually real. I don't know, whatever made our young hearts happy. I don't know. Your mom. No, I'm kidding. Frederick Holiday was known for his passion for cryptozoology and dedicated years of his life looking for evidence of life in Loch Ness. One day while investigating, Holiday looked towards a hill by the lake and saw a man in a black suit. Enter our brooding agent. Holiday thought it was just a random person given how much of a popular tourist spot it was, but he was slightly creeped out by the fact this man seemed to be staring straight at him despite being so far away. Frederick felt this malevolence and evil come off him that somehow reached him. Before he had a chance to remove himself from the situation, he heard a bizarre sound and the man just disappeared into thin air. He never saw him again, but a year later he went back to the lake for some more studies and ended up having a heart attack. The weirdest part? He died passing over the exact same spot the agent had been standing a year prior. And I feel like that very much was no coincidence. Filling at number 3 slot are Code 9 and 10. During the 60s, photographer Jim Templeton took a picture of his daughter near Burla Marsh. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it is a cute picture of her despite the astronaut-looking figure right behind her head, so let's talk about that. The next day, while he was at work, two men showed up claiming they worked for the government. They wouldn't tell Jim anything about themselves or what department they worked for, they just told them one was called Code 9 and the other was called Code 10. Alright, I don't know why that just reminded me of Codename Kids Next Door. Either way, their badges didn't even indicate any particular government agency that he had heard of, but he still agreed to get in their car and drive back to the marsh. There, the men asked him how the weather was the day the picture was taken, how the animals were reacting, and he said they were huddled together as if they were scared of something. After saying that, the men became extremely hostile, claiming he was lying. How do you even get home from being in a random marsh? Hitchhike your way home. Now at number 2 is the Maury Island incident. Back in 1947, Harold Dahl and his son were putting logs on their fishing boat when they saw 6 donut-shaped crafts hovering above them. The spacecrafts dropped some kind of molten waste on the lake, which ended up killing Harold's dog and badly injuring his son. Upset by the event, he spoke to his boss and friends about the incident in the upcoming days, and eventually he was visited by a man in all black. The man forced him not to speak about the encounter, and a few days later, multiple Air Force agents visited Harold as well. They came to gather information from him about the incident, and it gained enough attention that the FBI actually wrote a report on the matter. But after meeting the man in black, Harold claimed the whole story was suddenly a lie, but years later confessed that it was actually the truth, but he was forced to say that it wasn't. Let me give you one chance to guess who forced him to say it was a lie. If you didn't guess Men in Black, then you're dumb. And finally, at number 1 is Wool. This was shared by an anonymous man who said he was sightseeing in Washington DC one summer and accidentally wandered into the State Department apartment building. Okay, now first of all, I don't think anyone can just accidentally go in there. I'm sure there's intense security checks, but anyway, I'm not gonna fact check you, anonymous man. He wandered around the lobby before security started becoming suspicious of him and ushered him out of the building. But before they did, the elevator opened and 5 men came out. 1 was in a grey suit and 4 were in black suits wearing black hats that hid their eyes and faces completely. And despite it being summer, they were even wearing long black trench coats. As the group was walking by, one of the men in black slipped on the marble floor and fell and dropped his portfolio. The fall happened quite near to the man who was telling the story, so he helped him up, and while doing so he realized the man's legs seemed critically weak. Like, it felt to him like there was just a lot of wool under the suit, and that's what gave it its bulky, cartoonish appearance. The cherry on top of all of that was, despite falling on quite a hard marble floor, the man's expression never flinched or changed once. It's like he couldn't feel pain, he couldn't feel anything at all. And right next to the portfolio, the man found a coin that had writing on it in a language he couldn't recognize, with a wolf man on one side and 2 moons and some navigational lines on the other. Starting us off with number 10 is Mothman. Now, this creature has been seen around the Point Pleasant area of West Virginia, but I won't go too into depth about it because you guys can watch my West Virginia myths video if you guys want to know more about it. Self-plug, hahaha. No, I'm kidding. Either way, Point Pleasant was known to be frequented by a lot of men in black, asking people around town about the Mothman and to not speak about it. They talked to reporter Mary Hire, who later claimed the men who questioned her did not blink even once. One night in Jan of '67, Mary was working late in her office when a 4'6" tall man walked in wearing a black suit, glasses, and thick shoes that added about 2 inches to his height. He spoke in an incredibly low voice and asked for directions to Welsh, but kept edging closer and closer to her. Again, he never blinked and picked up a ballpoint pen off her desk like he had never seen such a contraption in his life. He then grabbed it, laughed out loud quite hard, and then ran out of the building. No one saw him come in or out except Mary. Coming in at number 9 is the disappearing coin. Dr. Herbert Hopkins was a consultant on a UFO case in Maine involving a man called Barney Hill who had allegedly been abducted. One night he got a call from an activist in the UFO community asking if they could meet and discuss the case. Now, Hopkins agreed to meet the man, but not even 2 minutes later there was a knock on his door. The man didn't seem like an activist. He was in a black suit and tie, he had no hair, no eyebrows, and was the palest person Hopkins had ever seen. The scariest bit about it was that Hopkins never mentioned his address, yet the man just showed up anyway, and when he did, the doctor's dog would just not stop barking at him. Guys, dogs sense evil. I also did videos on that. So many self-plugs today. The man asked him about the case and afterwards told him he had 2 coins in his pocket and told Herbert to take one out. He did that and the agent told him to watch the coin. It began to take on a silvery appearance and then started going out of focus and then fading away till it vanished completely. The agent stared at Hopkins for a while and said the coin would never be seen on Earth again, and then inquired what all he knew about Barney Hill. Freaked out, Hopkins said he thought Hill died before the abduction took place, and the agent told him he was right and that Hill didn't have a heart, much like him not having a coin. Whatever the hell that meant. Probably trying to be poetic, but I don't get it. He then advised Hopkins to destroy all information he had on the case, and Hopkins listened and burnt all of it. Afterwards, he was experiencing a lot of phone troubles, and his company said his line had been tampered with, and he immediately knew that they had tapped his line. He never saw the man again. At number 8, we have the collision. Back in 1967, Robert Richardson went for a drive during which he claimed he collided with a UFO. On impact, the spacecraft vanished completely, yet Richard managed to find a small lump of metal on the road and take it home. What happened to your car, Richard? How did you even get home? There's just some, loose ends that are just not really making sense, right? Either way, a week later, 2 men in black showed up at his doorstep asking for the piece of metal he had taken from the scene. And he hadn't told anyone about the piece of metal, so how did those random men even know about it, let alone where he lived? He then told them he had already given it to authorities for testing, and they replied saying they were going to hurt and threaten his wife, saying, if you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, then you'd better get the metal back. He never saw them again. But also, what the hell happened with the testing? Did they find anything? So many loose ends, Richard. So many loose ends. Filling seventh slot is the third party. This one comes from Redditor Chronic Cyclist, who said there was this guy in England that was recruited to work for a special department of the Royal Air Force. They specialized in cleaning up after aliens had visited Earth, and one day on the job the man decided to take some photos, because I mean, Pixar didn't happen, right? He ended up getting in touch with a third party person that was into these encounters, but the photos were given to the police, supposedly the men in black, in disguise, and then they were lost. Both men involved ended up getting arrested, and the third party guy had his house suspiciously burnt down. Either way, the guy who took the photos had copies in his storage box and agreed to have them released after he died. I haven't seen these photos, so clearly the man's still alive. I don't know why I sound salty about that. Live your life. I'll wait. I'm patient. Now at number 6 is the camera footage. This was a legit camera footage of men in black in a Canadian hotel. The two men showed up asking questions about one of the employees. The employee claimed they had recently seen a UFO and told all their friends about it, and boom, in the next couple of days, the men in black just show up to his workplace. Thankfully, that day the employee in question wasn't at work, so they dodged a major bullet. But similar to Dr. Hopkins' case, the staff described the men as having no hair on their head or face, perhaps disguising it with a wig, and having weirdly hypnotizing eyes. The eyes are interesting because in the movie the agents use memory erasing neuralizers, but maybe in real life they just use their eyes. I don't know, it'd be a lot more convenient than carrying that thing around, that's for damn sure. The outfits were also really questionable. The black suits just fit weirdly, like they were trying so hard to be normal and fit in, but something was just very off. They looked like mafia bosses from a noir movie, if I'm honest. I saw the footage, I did. They stuck around asking the employees some more questions about conspiracies and then left. It left the staff quite shaken, and honestly I don't blame them. Coming in at number 5 is Lev. Now this story was shared by an anonymous woman who said she was sure her dad was best friends with a Men in Black agent growing up. Now as a kid her dad worked as an engineer and was constantly visited by this guy in a black suit, hat and glasses that went by the name Lev. He was entirely bald, which was quite a weird hair choice for the time, and his skin was suspiciously smooth and hairless. Now someone dropped the T. It wasn't laser hair removal, it wasn't waxing, it wasn't Nair hair removal cream, so I mean drop that hair care routine, sis. We need it. Help a brother out, Lev. Now, either way, Lev would be in the same outfit rain or shine. Even on days it was absolutely boiling out, he would be wearing a suit and coat and no questions asked. He had a reputation of hanging around the engineers in the area and lived in a tiny house near a supermarket. The woman was sure her dad knew Lev was an agent or an alien of some kind, but they had some sort of alliance. At number 4 we have the Stalker. Jack Robinson and his wife Mary were both avid UFO researchers back in the day, but the deeper they got into it, the weirder their life got. They would come home and find their house rummaged through and all their UFO files disturbed and scattered. Someone kept gaining entry into their house no matter how many times they changed their locks. Sounds like you got a problem. Now Mary then started noticing a bizarre tall man in a bulky black suit and hat that would constantly stare at their apartment from the downstairs doorway. She was scared that this was the man who was breaking into their house, and so she mentioned it to her friend Tim. Tim then drove the couple there and actually took a picture of the man who was believed to be a Men in Black agent. Now my thing with this story is if the agents really wanted the couple to stop, why didn't they just steal all their UFO files instead of just rummaging through them? Just cut to the chase. Or just burn that shit down like you did to that other guy. I'm not advocating arson, I'm just saying there are more efficient ways to get rid of things. Filling our number 3 slot is the base. This one comes from Redditor Corothis59, who said their older brother was in the army, and one night him, his wife, and some friends went to a hill near their base to look at the moon. Romance. Who said it's dead? But while they were there, they saw a blazing blue orb pulling moves that no normal human aircraft could do, and that was a fact considering the elder brother was an expert in aircraft. The group was sat there in awe just looking at the craft before the lights stopped and the craft just stayed hovering in the sky, almost like it was watching them watch it. It was about 10 PM now, and all of a sudden the craft lunges towards them, and next thing you know they open their eyes, it's 4 AM, and they were hundreds of miles away from the base in the middle of a random wheat field. Now they got out of it trying to gauge their tire tracks to see which way they came in, but there were no tire tracks. The car just got there like it fell out of the sky, which at this point I believe happened. Crazy as shit. happen on this list. A few days later, men in black visited the brother's wife and threatened her to not talk about anything she had seen. They then showed up at the brother's base and threatened him as well, which wasn't even possible because the base was such a controlled access intelligence area, randomers can't just walk in. But the strangest part was that no one saw them come or go. It's like they were invisible or camouflage, which I'm sure would be very easy for aliens to accomplish. Either way, the family never saw the men in black again, but the wife of the brother still bursts into tears every time they're mentioned. Talk about leaving a lasting impression. Now at number 2 are the photos. Some of you may know Danny Gordon, who used to be a very famous radio personality. At the end of the 80s, Danny became obsessed with the Wythe County UFO sightings. Countless people in the county said they had seen bizarre objects in the air, and he wanted to get photographic proof. There was even one time a full school bus of kids saw UFOs going over a shopping mall as he quickly ran to take photos. And these photos were at very close range, and they proved the crafts weren't man-made and they weren't from this earth. But after he'd captured the proof, Danny's life started going downhill. He got a call from an anonymous ex-military man who warned him that his photos could cost him everything and to stop his research for his family's sake. When in doubt, emotional blackmail, apparently. A few days later, 2 men in black showed up at his house claiming they were journalists at a magazine and wanted to interview him. After the interview was over, the men left and Danny realized his photos were all gone as well. He then called the magazine they said they worked for and they claimed they'd never heard of Danny, let alone commission an article about him. Things got worse when he suffered a heart attack, and even his doctor advised him to stop the research since it was jeopardizing his health. He gave up in the end and never saw the men again. And finally, at number 1 is the postman. A postal worker in Washington DC said he was delivering mail one day and decided to just chill and have an apple. He finished it and saw no trash cans around him, so he just threw it on the floor, after which a security guard approached him, lecturing him and telling him that the area and building he was in was under constant surveillance and that it's not safe for him to just throw apples around. He was like, okay boomer, and then just moved on with his life. A few days later, he was on his usual delivery route when he came back to the same building. He saw 3 men going towards the building, except they weren't men at all. They looked like they were waddling, not walking, and they were incredibly thin. If anything, it was their frames that freaked him out more than anything else. He went inside the building regardless because aliens aside, he still had a job to do. Still gotta get that bread, you get me? Now as soon as he set foot in the building, a group of men in black surrounded him, asking him what he had just seen. He was about to speak when one of the thin figures he saw earlier came up next to him, and then he just couldn't speak. He had lost the ability. No words were coming out and he was horrified. The men then grilled him for hours and then let him go. The next day, his mail route had been changed.
Starting us off this countdown, we have Harold Dahl. This is supposedly the real-life story that inspired the movie Men in Black. So on June 27th, 1947, Harold Dahl, his young son, and his dog went out on a conservation mission. While out on the fishing boat, they saw 6 donut-shaped aircrafts hovering in the air above them. The crafts then started dropping weird molten type waste onto the lake. He described it as if it was raining lava or white metal. This ended up hitting his son's arm and the dog. The son was badly injured and sadly the dog didn't survive. When this happened, Harold managed to take a picture of the aircraft. The following morning, he was visited by a man in a black suit at a local diner. The man apparently threatened Harold to delete the photo, and he was told to not talk about the incident. But this story has been retold so many times that the facts are now jumbled. Some say that it was his son that got his arm burnt on the alien lava, but in another story, it was his co-worker, so I don't even know what to think.
Coming in at number 9, we have the cornfield. It should be no surprise that we are doing a list about Men in Black and we got a point about a cornfield. Aliens love cornfields for whatever reason. Maybe they land in a cornfield, they scoop up a bunch of corn, then they make popcorn and that they can eat while they watch humans freak out because they landed in a cornfield. That seems like the perfect circle of entertainment. But this point was thrown on top of Reddit by Redditor Muffins for Petey. They said that they grew up on a farm and one night they saw something fly down from the sky and hover right above their farm. It was shaped like a rectangle and looked like it was glowing light, like a massive glowing log in the sky. Well then this thing just vanished. Almost as fast as it came, it was gone. They must have only needed a little bit of popcorn. The next day there was a knock at the door. It was 2 men in black suits and they had dark glasses on. They said that they needed to inspect the farm because there was a supposed gas leak. It was very strange intrigued because mostly everything on the farm was run by solar energy. These two men had government identification, but gave them very little information as to what they were going to do. They just told them that they needed to stay in their home or they were going to be arrested for endangering people. So they listened, and then these two dudes poked around for a little bit and then they were off. They never said if they found anything or fixed a gas leak. The whole thing was just very suspicious. And guys, make sure you hit that like button because it really helps us out.
In our 8th spot, we have Shane Sover. This next encounter happened fairly recently. So on October 14th, 2008, hotel manager Shane Sover had been informed by a security guard at his hotel that he had seen a UFO from the hotel. 2 weeks later, hotel staff were panicked when two strange men entered the hotel in search of Shane and the security guard. Shane, wanting to see who these men were, checked the security footage. And sure enough, two men in black suits wearing a hat could be seen wandering the hotel. The men didn't have any hair and looked fairly strange. Yeah, I'm thinking they were like aliens disguised as humans. Moving on to number 4, we have Jack and Mary Robinson. Back in 1968, Jack and his wife Mary were both UFO researchers. Didn't even know that was a job, but where can I apply? But the more they researched into aliens and UFOs, the more weird stuff began to happen. One time they returned home to find that their house had been searched. All their files regarding UFOs and aliens had been tampered with. Then things started to get worse. Mary started noticing a man that would stand outside their apartment and watch them. The man was always wearing a black suit and a hat. In fact, they managed to capture a photo of him. Mary had told her friend what was happening, and the friend drove over and saw the man for herself and took a photo of him. It's so freaky.
Coming in number 3, we have the night visitors. I'm on the fence when it comes to meeting aliens. Like, of course I would want to meet aliens, but it would have to be the right setting. Like in a park or at a party or a big reveal event like they do with the latest iPhone. Steve Cook is like, now I give you the alien. But the way this next story goes wouldn't be my ideal circumstance. Reddit user Chop Stew told a story of an alien encounter that brought a man in black into his life. It all happened super fast. He woke up in the middle of the night and there were 5 tall gray beings standing around his bed. He was in a haze, then he started to panic, but before he could even speak, he was back asleep. He woke up the next morning feeling a little bit rattled. Whatever he saw last night seemed so real, but it couldn't have been. It must have been a strange dream. The next day at work, he was called into HR, but there was a new person working. This lady had just come in for the day from head office. She wanted to just talk about his personal life. They chatted for a bit and then she asked him about his dreams. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up when she posed the question. He didn't give in and kept the alien sighting to himself. The next day, the regular HR person was back and he never found out who this replacement was and why they wanted to speak to him and how they knew about what had just happened to him the night before. So this time, it was a lady in black. And coming to the number 1 spot, we have a message from the future. Now, who knows if this is true? It's fun to believe stories like the one I'm about to tell you because it makes life a little bit more interesting. But a story I snagged online spoke of someone who started to receive messages on their phone. They were from an unknown number, but they had details about things that seemed to be random. The messages would be like, a man in a plaid shirt will buy a coffee with 2 creams and 2 sugars next to you and forget his wallet. Like, okay, but what does that mean? But then these events started happening. It was like these texts were coming from the future. So he started to respond to them, but the person would never communicate outside of these messages that were hints from the future. But why was this coming to our random writer? Well, we never found out because one day a black van pulled up next to him and 4 men in black suits jumped out and told him that he was under arrest. They put him in the van and then took him to a police station. They searched him, took his phone, he was detained for a few hours and then released and was given everything except for his phone. They said it got lost and they would send it to him when they found it, but he never got his phone back, and from there, the messages just stopped.
Starting us off with number 10 is the disappearing coin. Dr. Herbert Hopkins was a consultant on a UFO case in Maine involving a man called Barney Hill who had allegedly been abducted. One night he got a call from an activist in the UFO community asking if they could meet and discuss the case. Hopkins agreed to meet the man, but a few minutes later there was a knock on his door. The man didn't seem like an activist, he was was in a black suit and tie, he had no hair, no eyebrows, and was the palest person Hopkins had ever seen. The weirder part was Hopkins never disclosed his address, yet the man just showed up anyway, and when he did, the doctor's dog would not stop barking at him. The man asked him about the case and afterwards told him he had 2 coins in his pocket and told Herbert to take one of them out. He did so, and the agent told him to watch the coin very closely, and he did. It began to take on a silvery appearance and then started going out of focus and fading away till it wasn't there at all. The agent then stared at Hopkins for a while and said the coin would never be seen on Earth again, and then inquired about what all he knew about Barney Hill. Freaked out, Hopkins said he thought Hill might have died before the abduction took place, and the agent told him he was exactly right and that Hill didn't have a heart, much like him not having a coin. I don't really get the link or what he meant by that, but anyway, he then advised Hopkins to destroy all information he had on the case, and Hopkins complied and burnt all of it. Afterwards, he was experiencing a lot of phone troubles, and his company said his line had been tampered with, and he immediately knew they had tapped his line. He never saw the man again. Coming in at number 9 is the Loch Ness Death. Growing up, I think we all thought there was a massive monster or animal of some kind in Loch Ness, like an ancient dinosaur, a mythical creature that was actually real, whatever made our young hearts happy. One man in specific, named Frederick Holliday, was known for his passion for cryptozoology and had dedicated years of his life looking for evidence of life in Loch Ness. One day while investigating, Holliday looked towards a hill near the lake and saw a man in a black suit. Enter our brooding agent. Holliday didn't think much of it at first, considering it was a very popular tourist spot, but he was freaked out by the fact the man seemed to be staring straight at him. Despite being so far away from him, Holliday felt a malevolence come off him that actually reached him. Before he had a chance to remove himself from the situation, he heard a strange sound and the man just disappeared into thin air. He never saw the man again, but a year later he went back to Loch Ness for more studies and ended up having a heart attack. The weirdest part? He died passing over the exact same spot the agent had been standing in a year prior, and I feel like that was very much not a coincidence at all. At number 8 we have the dizzy spell. Dr. Albert K. Bender was a famous researcher who founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and you may have not heard of it because he abruptly shut it down after being visited by the Men in Black. By 1955 he was so close to releasing a paper proving the US government had covered up proof of UFOs. He was about to publish his paper in the Space Review, but alas, that was never gonna fly with the agents, was it? And so they decided to pay him a visit. One night when Bender was in bed, he suddenly felt a nauseating dizzy spell. He started seeing many dark shapes in his room and thought perhaps he was going to pass out or he was just seeing things, but the shapes slowly took form and materialized into men in black suits and hats. He couldn't see their faces, but the only thing he could see were their eyes that were glowing. The men could somehow speak to Bender's mind directly without saying a word. They forced him to destroy his findings and stop his research into the subject. As soon as this encounter took place, Bender was scarred for life. He shut down the bureau, and people claim he was never the same. His other work was almost unreadable after that, and he lived with perpetual anxiety and fear of the men. He'd get continuous phone calls with no one on the other end, and he ended up dying in 2002. See, this is what happens when someone gets too close to the truth. They shut them up and get rid of them. Coming in at number 5 is the Stalker. Jack Robinson and his wife Mary were both avid UFO researchers way back when, but the deeper they got, the weirder their life got. They would come home and find their house rummaged through and all their UFO files disturbed and disrupted. Someone kept gaining entry into their house no matter how many times they changed their locks. Mary then started noticing a bizarre tall man in a bulky black suit and hat that would consistently stare at their apartment from the doorway. She was scared that that man was the one breaking into their house, so she mentioned it to her friend Tim. Tim drove them both there and actually took a picture of the man who was believed to be a Men in Black agent. My only thing with this story is if the agents really wanted the couple to stop, why didn't they just steal all their UFO files instead of just rummaging through them? Just cut to the chase. At number 4 are the photos. Some of you may know of Danny Gordon, who used to be a very famous radio personality. Towards the end of the 80s, Danny became obsessed with the Wythe County UFO sightings. Countless people in the county said they had seen bizarre objects in the sky, and he wanted to get photographic proof. There was even one time a full school bus of kids saw UFOs going over a shopping mall as he quickly took the photos. And those photos were at a very close range, and they proved the crafts weren't man-made, they weren't from this earth. But after he had captured the proof, Danny's life started going downhill. He got a call from an anonymous ex-military man who warned him that his photos could cost him everything and to stop research for his family's sake. When in doubt, emotional blackmail is the way to go, apparently. Either way, it didn't end there. A few days later, two men in black showed up at his house claiming they were journalists at a magazine and wanted to interview him about the pictures. After the interview was over, the men left and Danny realized his photos were all gone as well. He then called the magazine they said they worked for and they claimed they'd never heard of Danny, let alone commissioned an article about him. Things got even worse when he suffered a heart attack and even his doctor advised him to stop the research since it was jeopardizing his health. He gave up in the end and never saw the men again. Filling our number 3 slot is the mailman. A postal worker in Washington DC said he was delivering mail one day and decided to chill for a bit and have an apple. He finished it and saw no trash cans around and decided to just throw it on the ground, and after which a security guard approached him, lecturing him and telling him that the area and building he's in is under constant surveillance all the time and that it's not safe for him to do that. First of all, say no to littering, never litter, ever. He thought about what the security guard said, but not too much, and just went on his way. A few days later, he was on his usual delivery run when he came back to the same building. He saw 3 men going towards the building, except they weren't men at all. They looked like they were waddling, not walking, and they were impossibly thin. And it was their frames that freaked him out more than anything else. He went inside the building regardless because aliens aside, he still had to do his job. As soon as he stepped foot into the building, a group of men in black surrounded him, asking him what he had just seen. He was about to speak when one of the thin figures he saw earlier came up next to him, and then he really couldn't speak even if he wanted to. He was horrified. The men grilled him for hours and hours and then let him go, and the next day his mail route had anonymously been changed. Now at number 2 is the bullet. Paul Miller worked in the American Air Force, and one day whilst returning home from a hunting trip, he witnessed a gigantic luminous disc in the sky. He followed the path of the disc and saw it land in an empty field, and out of it came 2 humanoid looking figures. A trained army man, Miller didn't even hesitate to pull out his gun and shoot one. His aim was almost impeccable and he was sure he had hit one of them. He quickly ran towards his car but realized he had suddenly lost time. What should have been 30 seconds getting to his car had been 3 hours. Trying not to overthink it, he went back to work the next day and encountered 3 men in black. They said they had his file and that they knew everything even though he hadn't told anyone about what happened. They gently threatened him, saying it'd be best if he forgot the whole thing, and Miller was terrified. They knew his address, his name, his parents' address, everything, so not wanting to take any chances, he said nothing.
In our number 10 spot, we have UFO spotting in Washington. 2 harbor patrolmen in the Washington state named Harold H. Dahl and Fred L. Chrisman spotted a UFO over the water of Puget Sound, Washington. It was 1947, and after this incident, they were approached by a man dressed in black that forcefully advised them to not discuss the incident further. This was one of the first sightings of the men in black. The men were described as being extremely mysterious, never looking the patrolman in the eyes. Ooh, probably to cover up their reptile eyes, am I right? In our number 9 spot, we have the Stargazer. A young man by the name of Harry lived in the country on a farm and was fascinated by the stars. He was given a telescope for Christmas one year, and he would look up at the stars and study them every night. One night, he spotted something in the sky like nothing he had ever seen before. It was a triangle, metal-looking object flying in the sky. He thought that it had to be a UFO. He ran inside to call his friend and tell him about it, and after he got off the telephone, he heard a knock on his door. He opened it to see 3 men dressed in black from head to toe. There was something a bit weird about them though. They all kind of looked alike, and their noses were almost non-existent. Before Harry could speak, they were telling him to forget what he had seen and never speak of it again. They also subtly threatened his family and his future if he spoke about it. Terrified, he vowed not to. He eventually decided to share his story online because because technically he wouldn't be speaking about it. Upon years of reflection, Harry believes that he met some kind of alien. In our number 8 spot, we have the president's Men in Black. In 2012, it was discovered that President Obama of the USA had a few men in black working for him that could have very well been from another world. Footage was discovered of his security at the US-Israel Policy Conference, and they were looking rather alien-like. From the front, completely normal. From the back, we see a bald man with no ears and a pointy chin. His nose looks short and rounded, and his eyes appear to be dark and sunken in. Do you think there were possibly alien Men in Black guards guarding the president that day? It's definitely possible. In our number 7 spot, we have the Fire Watch sighting. A man named Gabe was working a shift at a fire watch tower in the woods when he saw a black SUV pull up in the wee hours of the morning. A few minutes later, the sound of a firearm went off. The next thing he knew, there was a knock on his tower and 2 large men in black were waiting behind the door. He opened the door and they immediately questioned him, asking him to reveal what he saw. He said he saw nothing, and after a moment they appeared to believe him. They told him to never speak of this experience to anyone. Looking back, he definitely thinks he met one of the Men in Black. Originally, he chalked these men up to some kind of gang, but now he definitely thinks that those 2 men were the Men in Black. In our number 6 spot, we have the UFO researcher. In 1976, Dr. Herbert Hopkins, who is a UFO researcher, got a call from someone who claimed to be a rep from a New Jersey UFO organization. The man asked if Hopkins was alone and if Hopkins would be willing to share his research. Hopkins said sure and began sharing with him. Once he hung up the phone, a man was at his doorstep. He described the man as being bald, without eyebrows, wearing a neatly tailored black suit. He had red lips and pale white skin. The man took out a coin and told Hopkins to watch it. It started to develop a silver color instead of copper, and then the silver became bluish and the penny was getting quite fuzzy, out of focus, blurred, and then it was simply gone. Apparently after this incident, he was instructed to destroy all of his research. In our number 4 spot, we have the Niagara Hotel. A manager of a hotel in Niagara by the name of Sovar and his security guard reported seeing a triangular UFO outside their building. A group called the Aerial Phenomena Investigations Team reported the incident with the 2 men's consent. A few weeks later, 2 tall men in black suits came into the hotel and spoke with Sovar and the security guard. They freaked out the employees allegedly, as they had identical faces, no eyebrows or eyelashes, and were very pale. These 2 men were caught on surveillance for the hotel, and that footage definitely makes me feel very nervous. A small part of me wants to go to Niagara and ask every hotel about this incident and just, find out which hotel it is.